Okay, now we're ready to get started. So appreciate you being here on this Wednesday afternoon. My name is Rob Cameron. I'm an architect evangelist with Microsoft. I work with major media and entertainment, communications sector type companies to bring their applications over to Windows Phone 7. So I've been working with the Windows Phone 7 team probably for, it's actually almost coming up on 2 years on the product before it even released. Very excited to be here for two reasons. One, I didn't have to jump on a plane because I live in Swanee, Georgia. So it's a short little drive down, about 2 hours in traffic, but I made it. I had a session this morning. Who attended the session this morning? Anyone? Okay, awesome. Thanks for coming back. That makes me feel good. Who's programmed with XNA previously? All right, we got a few folks. Everyone else is probably a Silverlight developer. So welcome to the session. It's fantastic. What we're going to cover today is an advancement in the Mango platform for Windows Phone 7. Mango was announced at MIX. Right? We actually announced the platform at Mobile World Congress. We announced, we kind of displayed or talked about the Mango development platform at MIX, and we said that the tools for Mango will come in May. So it's May 18th, so I think we only got a few more days. You know, they're coming real soon. And they'll be able to install right over your existing set of tools. Now, with the Mango tools, there's a tremendous amount of features available to the platform. And we're going to cover one of the most exciting features that I think has come to the platform is the ability to render Silverlight and XNA together within the same application. So this session definitely applies to Silverlight developers too. And you're going to see why. And I'm really excited to have you here to attend, and we'll cover it. So most importantly, I have a secret question for my session. And if I ask my question and whoever's hand I happen to see first, I apologize if I don't get it quite right. But come on up, I'll call you up, and we'll fill out your name, and then you can go down to the Microsoft booth. There's an Expanses booth right near the Microsoft booth, and you'll be able to redeem it for a free phone. So stay to the end, and I get the free question. Also, please do fill out your surveys. As everyone likes to say, we'd love to get your feedback. All right, so today with Windows Phone 7, there's a, up on the Mix site, or I'm sorry, up on the App Hub site, if you go to apphub.create.msdn.com, or you kind of hunt around the forums or go to different blog posts about Windows Phone 7, you often see a question posted, or a question of, which technology should I use for my rendering in my Windows Phone 7 application? For many cases, it's pretty obvious, right? If you are doing data binding, you're building a newsreader application, you're doing things like that with the application platform where you need sort of an object model, a control framework. It makes total sense to do Silverlight. And then there's cases where you're an XNA game developer and you need 3D. So you kind of end up using XNA framework, XNA Game Studio to build your application. But there's sort of scenarios where there's a question like you can easily build a 2D game in Silverlight, or you can build one in XNA framework, and both can be used and work fine, and both have the capabilities to do it. Now with Silverlight, if you write a game, you kind of have to create your own game loop and that type of thing. So you got to do a little bit of work, but you can get it done. For XNA, if you were to try to, when you try to do things like a high score screen or those types of things, those types of aspects of your application, like non-game development, you have to do a little bit of work to kind of mimic what you can do in Silverlight. But in the end, today, you have to pick one particular platform. So what is exciting about today's platform is that there are many, many libraries available within XNA framework that you may or may not be aware that you can use in Silverlight. I mentioned this in my session this morning. One of my favorite pieces of XNA framework code to use is the touch panel input for doing gesture input. I just find it very easy to work with, and you can use that touch panel class within your Silverlight applications if you need to capture a flick, or kind of a pan zoom, pinch zoom, panning, et cetera, you can get that all from the touch panel input. But there are other things too, like you can have fun with the microphone. You can do playback media with the media player in XNA from Silverlight. So anything that's not visually rendering, you can do today. You can do that from either platform. You can call either library. So it's the same thing for XNA. XNA really doesn't have The XNA framework for this platform originated from Zune, and on Zune you couldn't make like a web service call. They didn't have any of the APIs. So from XNA framework, you can call out to a web service. You can put some data into Windows Azure. You have all that flexibility. So with this platform, so they kind of built it to try to have as much compatibility as possible. As I mentioned, if you're writing a game for Windows Phone 7, you're probably thinking about XNA. And you know, when you start out with XNA, especially when you come at it from a Silverlight background, you know, with Silverlight, you're so familiar with having a control framework, full rendering capabilities, lots of objects, lots of things to kind of work with, storyboards to help you abstract out your animations. So when you go to XNA, maybe it will be a little intimidating. Now, if you're an XNA game developer, you want to do something really, really innovative. Like maybe you want to do something, you need data from the web, you want to use the web browser control, you want to play back video within the media element. You know, you just can't do that today. It's just not possible. So again, you know, I think for this audience where they have a lot of Silverlight developers in the audience, you know, I'm kind of hinting towards what, you know, the title of the session was, of doing both together. But you know, think about, you know, wouldn't it be great, let's say you're a high-end cooking equipment sales. You know, your business is, you want to sell cooking equipment, blenders, and, you know, mixers, and, you know, all the kind of things that, that your audience really, really loves to use to make a great meal. You know, wouldn't it be great to have your Silverlight application calling those REST services, data binding to the data, but then have the ability to maybe pull down a model for the blender that they're really interested in, so that on their phone they can manipulate it, look at it from all the different sizes, change colors, you know, check out the blender that they really want to have. Or maybe you're a high-end car manufacturer, or just a car manufacturer in general. I mean, wouldn't it be great to be able to pull down that 3D model, you know, not have to give up all your Silverlight controls and all the stuff that you can do in Silverlight, but be able to incorporate that and still do that 3D rendering all within the same application to kind of have best of both worlds. So with XNA shared graphics, that all becomes possible. So with XNA shared graphics, it's in, you know, as I alluded to, you know, you have now the capability to render full 3D models and manipulate those models and kind of texture them and light them, all within your Silverlight application with the Mango tools that will release sometime this month. So they kind of finished that integration. They started it with the non-visual, but now the visual, the ability to draw, is now coming to the platform. So one thing to note is that you are writing a Silverlight application. We have a new project template, the Rich Graphics application template, and it's already pre-configured. It has a sort of a standard Silverlight page. You click a button, we'll show you in a second, and you navigate over to a page that has the XNA framework rendering enabled. But you are writing a Silverlight game. So, you know, Silverlight and XNA are both running at the same time. Now, we have this new property. It's called Set Sharing Mode, and you basically enable XNA capabilities within your Silverlight game, and it makes it available to you. If you try to do this within an application and you forget to kind of set it up, you know, enable this property and then add a service to app.xaml, a lifetime application, lifetime service, then, you know, it won't work. So that's why it's definitely, but it's pretty easy to do, pretty straightforward to enable within your application. So the way this works, and a little bit of background. So with XNA Game Studio, for those that didn't attend my session this morning, it has a game class, and within it, it also has a graphics device manager. Now with XNA, you are down on the metal. You are right there writing to the back buffer of the GPU, and you're kind of, you know, and when you're done, XNA takes it and takes that information and puts it to the display. And it's very low-level programming and development within the application. So what they've done is they've sort of encapsulated that functionality and brought that over into your Silverlight application. So what happens is that when you're, you know, so now if you think about it, you have two rendering technologies. You have Silverlight and you have XNA, and they're both kind of running at the same time. So when XNA graphics are kicked in, Silverlight tries to free up as much memory as possible. So it'll try to drastically reduce the amount of memory that it's consuming to allow XNA full reign to do the rendering, because generally XNA rendering, especially like a 3D model, will be pretty intensive on the GPU. So Silverlight gets out of the way, and then you can kind of manage that by enabling it and disabling it on pages as you need to. So you can choose to only use it on areas where you want to. Now on the flip side, if Silverlight is running, and let's say you enable shared graphics for your entire application, who's played a game on, who has Windows Phone 7 device and played a game, or any application, you notice like if you go back to the start menu, you tombstone your app, and then you come back and you get that resuming menu. You're kind of waiting for the resume to happen. Well, especially for an XNA framework game, when you do resume, it can take a long time because you're kind of reloading that content. So they've addressed it in Mango in general. They've improved that tombstoning support. But when you have shared graphics enabled, we don't unload the graphics, because if we did, it would make your application not perform very well. So, and while Silverlight gets out of the way, because it can, with XNA, we kind of leave the content in memory and let the Silverlight run on top of it. And we've just done a tremendous amount of performance and tuning to get the platform forward. And when you see it, I think you'll be impressed. All right, so let's jump on in it. So what I'm going to do is switch over to some code, have a solution here. So just to kind of show the picture here, let me just go File, New. So once you install the Mango tools, you go File, New, Project. You get a list under Silverlight, because you are creating a Silverlight application. And you'll see Windows Phone 3D graphics application. So that's essentially what this project template is enabled, or it has support for. So what I want to do first is I'm going to switch over to the screen here for the phone. I'm going to show you a demo. So this is the application. I'm just going to run it right from the phone. So it loads the Silverlight page, and I say change to XNA rendering page, and you see hello XNA within Silverlight. So kind of cleared the back buffer. Normally it's cornflower blue. It's kind of the theme color for the XNA team, I think, but I changed it to white and just rendered out and did a sprite font to draw some font to the screen. Now, let's go through the code a little bit to see how that works. So if we go to main-page.xaml, you'll see it's just your standard Silverlight page, and we just come in here and we double-click on the button. We navigate to a game-page.xaml. So game-page.xaml is where the XNA functionality is enabled. Now notice there's no XAML content on the page. Now you can put XAML content on the page, and you'll see we're going to do that in the other demos, but by default there isn't. All the rendering is being done by XNA. So if you go to the page class, there are a few things up top that we have up here. We have that we wanted to talk about. So we have a game timer. We have a content manager. These are all sort of the items that you use to render the XNA application within your Silverlight app. So for the rendering the code. There's a few things in here that I'll talk about in the demo too, and I'm just going to skip over. But essentially, if you go to you have on navigated to, which is your standard event, and we can expand that out. What you see here is when your app is navigated to, we're enabling the timer for the game timer that actually runs and executes the XNA code in the background. And then on navigated from, and then we go down to draw. And you look at draw. And this is really what I wanted to just cover here, is that we have this thing called a sprite batch. So sprite batch is a class in XNA uses sprite batch to basically draw an image to the screen. And it takes in, for this case, we use the draw string method to just draw out a string. Let's switch back to slides. I want to go through a few concepts, and then we'll finish walking through this demo. So what about game? So I mentioned there in just a previous demo that there is you can see some of the XNA code, but I want to explain it a little bit, and then we'll go back and dive into it in more depth. So Microsoft.xna.framework.game is the base class game class that works in XNA. It gives the heartbeat methods. So whereas Silverlight is event-driven, so when you're writing a Silverlight application, you render, and then you just wait for user input. You know, the user swipes on the list box, they select an item on the list box, et cetera, et cetera. But if the user isn't doing anything, the application is just sitting there kind of waiting for something to happen. With a game development, you generally have a game loop, and the game loop will consist of loading content, update method, where update method is where you kind of do your non-visual things, like you do calculations, you determine if there were any collisions on your XNA objects. Maybe you take user input and the user manipulates on the screen and you translate that to somehow affecting the XNA model that you're being rendered at the time, a 3D model. And then the other part of the game loop is the draw method. So draw is the rendering. So there's load content, update, where you handle input and then and do calculations, and then rendering and draw. That's what the game class handles for you. So what we now have with Silverlight is this new hybrid model where we have a new game timer type that lets both of those application frameworks work together. So we have the event-driven model from Silverlight, and then we have the game timer class that on a separate thread is firing update and draw at 30 frames per second, which is the default for Windows Phone. The reason why it's 30 frames per second is because the screen hardware renders at 30 frames per second. All right, so here's a game timer class that is sort of just go through some of the events. Now, if you notice, game time, when you do game development, you're really cognizant of how much time you're taking in the update loop or the draw loop, and you use the time that has elapsed to do animations. So if you're doing a flipbook animation, how you flip in the pages, and if you flip the pages slowly, you know, if you have a stick man that walks slow, and then you flip the pages fast, the object that's in the flipbook, you know, moves more quickly. So the same principle applies to XNA game development. And in a sense, so if you want to make something appear to move slowly, you don't want to update it at 30 frames per second. Like if a person is walking on screen and they're taking a step every 3 seconds, you want to track the elapsed time since the last step, kind of separately out of band of the game loop. So if you look there at the event args, the game timer event args, you have an elapsed time. Elapsed time is the elapsed time since the last frame. So you can accumulate that in a variable, and then you know, oh, 3 seconds passed. Now I'm ready to take the next step or whatever. So that's pretty much how you do animation. It's very similar to the whole flipbook concept. So we also have, within this class, you can have start and stop. Now, as always, when you're programming for a phone, you want to be battery cognizant. So generally what you'll see is you'll call start in on navigated to. You'll call stop in on navigated from on your Silverlight page. That way you're not running your timer in the background when your application is tombstoned or whatnot, because it will run. It'll just continue to run, and you end up hurting the user's battery that way. So it's just good to be cognizant of that. All right, so let's go back to our sample here. And I have some awesome samples that I'm saving to the end because I want to, A, want you to stay around and win that free Windows Phone, and B, when you start to get worn down, it's the end of the day. I really appreciate you guys being here, that we have some exciting stuff to look at. What I'm going to do is I'm going to expand out these little code regions. Now, if we go to the top, we already talked about these in a previous, where you have the game timer. That's the class we just walked through. We have some particle stuff, kind of not relevant to this topic, but you'll see it in the demo. It essentially lets you randomly draw stuff to the screen in a fairly random way. Now let's go to game page constructor. And you see we create a new game timer. We set the update interval to 30 frames per second. Now you can set the update interval to a higher hertz if you want, but it's not going to render any faster on the screen. So you might as well save the user's battery, keep it at 30. And then you notice there we're wiring up the update and draw methods for the game loop. So again, you have the two models working together. You have the event-driven loop and then the game loop that's taking each flipbook page and then rendering it to screen. And we also enable enable gestures with the touch panel. So here's the on navigated to. There's timer.start. That's the key thing there. The rest is just, I'll show you, you'll see in the demo. And then on navigated from, timer.stop. Already talked about that and how to save the user's battery. Now here on update, you notice we're reading a gesture. We're looking for a double tap gesture. And then we're going to draw some particles on the screen in just a bit. And if every time they use a double taps, you can turn it on or off. And then finally is the rest of the draw code, which does all the drawing with the particles. So let's go ahead and run this. Oops. All right. So there I am on my page again. I'm going to double click. Oh, thank you very much. Now you're all with me on my page now. You can see the screen. Excellent. So let me start it over. So if I double click on the screen, you'll see some particles flying about the screen. It's just a Georgia peach and a TechEd logo. We're just kind of throwing it around. It's just one of the effects. It's one of the samples you can grab from AppHub. AppHub can absolutely help you become an XNA developer if you want to integrate XNA into your Silverlight applications. Just a simple demo. Definitely more to come. All right, let's go ahead and go back. Awesome. All right. So now here's the $20,000 question. So I've showed you how we can kind of do this southern movement where we're rendering Silverlight, and then we hit the button, and we say, let's go to XNA, and then we're rendering XNA on the next page. Now, how about mixing Silverlight and XNA on the same, not only within the same application, but within the same page? And so we have a new class in Mango. It's called the UI element renderer. So UI element is, pretty much the main base class for all of your controls within the Silverlight framework. It's just up there in the hierarchy. All the controls in rectangles and primitives all inherit from UI element. So with the XNA shared rendering enabled, we can overlay Silverlight onto XNA. And what ends up happening is, and it sounds, if you haven't done any XNA game programming, just a little bit of background, because there's a few folks in there who haven't. A texture 2D, you load content, you load it into a texture 2D object. And the texture 2D object essentially represents that image in memory. And then you can draw it using spritebatch.draw. So what the UI element renderer does, is it takes a snapshot whenever it gets called or accessed in draw in the XNA part of the application. So the Silverlight application is running over here. XNA is running at 30 frames a second. Remember, we have these two kind of render threads running at the same time. In the XNA part of your code in draw, you say UI element renderer.texture. You basically get a snapshot of whatever that Silverlight page is doing at the time. And it happens at such a fast rate, 30 frames per second, that it looks completely smooth and fluid. But in reality, that's what you're doing. You're literally taking a screen capture of the Silverlight rendering portion of the app and displaying it within the XNA page. So, but this means, though, is that you can have all the Silverlight controls. You can do input. You can texture models. You could have, for an XNA game developer, you could bring in a rectangle and display images and play video. Yes, question.
Does touch input get translated to those Silverlight controls?
So the question was, do touch input get translated to Silverlight controls? And it does, and I'm going to demonstrate that too. And we'll talk about that because there is a little trickiness. That's probably why you're asking the question. All right, so here's kind of the two ways that you can use this effort. So who's Silverlight developer? You familiar with like writable bitmap? So writable bitmap, it lets you take, you pass in a UI element to a writable bitmap object in Silverlight, and writable bitmap will take that UI element and all its children controls and basically turn it into an image. In many ways, that's exactly how the UI element renderer works. It'll take those UI elements and just turn it into a bitmap, essentially, or a texture. So you could use the UI element renderer kind of in the background. Like if you're a pure game developer, really kind of hardcore writing a game, you're not so interested in the Silverlight part, but you want to use it to do things that make your life easier. So maybe you wanted to write out some international text, or you just want to kind of use Silverlight to create a little scene, and then you just want to, maybe from the web, it's a lot easier to bind web data to Silverlight than XNA if there's no data binding in XNA. So you kind of do the data binding, you could render it out, and then you could have a single UI element renderer that in the background once it's loaded and it has this data, you can just say, UI element renderer.texture and then draw it on one time. Then the other option is the per frame target, more the flipbook model, where you have a UI element that's continuously rendering Silverlight code to your application. So examples would be, most games have a heads-up display. How many bullets do I have left? How much life do I have left? If you're playing Sims, how social am I being? Am I being a good person? Am I being a bad person? Those types of things. That's all part of your HUD. Why write about it at XNA, a bunch of XNA code when you could, render that a lot easier in Silverlight? So that's where you kind of have it running continuously. So let's go ahead and do a demo of XNA shared rendering. Just going to navigate to my project. So I'm just going to run it right off the bat here. So here we have my little teapot. So the teapot is kind of a standard game developer model that every game developer has to figure out how to render at one point or another in his life if he's studying gaming. So I can remember my Blender example or high-end car model or just having a 3D model of something that your end user or customer is interested in. And you can, I can kind of touch the teapot and manipulate it around. So there I'm doing touch input. And then within this scene, you have XNA data, or you have Silverlight data rendered as well. So these squares down here are Silverlight rectangles. So I can change the teapot to green, or I could change it to blue. And then I can come in here and I can tap on this Silverlight progress bar and adjust the color of the teapot to whatever color I want it to be. Picture I want to purchase my car with a phone. Wouldn't that be crazy, buying a car with a phone? So I want to pick my color, totally customize it. Same kind of idea. And then if I drag the teapot down here, let's say I'm trying to grab it by the snout here on the teapot, you notice I ended up hitting the color. So the Silverlight input, to your question back there, the Silverlight input prevents me from getting to the teapot. So it's something to consider. So we have a little animation storyboard. That might be one of your questions is, will Silverlight animations render within the scene, because you're taking this snapshot? And it does render, and it works fine, because again, we are rendering in XNA at 30 frames per second. So even though we're taking a snapshot of that Silverlight scene, it's happening so fast that it looks very smooth. So you kind of see if I pop it in there, you see it looks like it's just regular Silverlight running normal. You know what I mean? It doesn't, can't really see any difference to it at all. So it's just a quick little demo, and then I can get it out of the way, and then I can manipulate the teapot, and then go ahead and change it back and get out of the way, and then check out my fancy new car or whatnot. So that's just a quick demo that shows how you can overlay both Silverlight and XNA. Now let's look at this code here a little bit. So here, notice this is the game page.xaml. Oh, thank you. The game page.xaml within the Visual Studio. And if you look here, remember before in the previous example, the XAML page was empty because we were doing all our rendering within XNA. Now in this example, we can see that we've built out a very nice Silverlight page that has animations. And if I double click onto this button, you can see that if panel is visible, that we fire off a storyboard just like you do normally in Silverlight to render it out. Now, let's go ahead and switch over to the code so you can kind of see what's going on with this UI renderer. So there's the, we have this, so we have all the same things we had before. We have the game timer, et cetera, et cetera. But we have this new class called UI renderer helper. And what this does is it kind of helps us, it just wraps up some of this code for managing the teapot and hides it away. So it keeps your app a little bit cleaner. So inside of onNavigated2, we create a new UI element helper. And we'll look at this class in just a little bit. We pass in the timer so that it can hook into the onDraw and all update methods. That's a key thing to understand, that with this game timer, you could actually have multiple event handlers hooked into on draw and on update. So you can think of it this way. If you had 2 or 3 objects or models that you're rendering to the screen, you want them all to update and draw as objects. Each individual object could hook an event handler into that game timer and just plug right into the framework, and every time update gets called, it's going to fire for all those events. So that's what we're doing here. We're kind of encapsulating the code for the model and putting it into a separate class. Then the rest is just the sprite batch and the teapot. And then on navigator from, we do the stop again, and then draw. We just say draw teapot. Just treat it as an object. And then finally, here's draw teapot, which this is the XNA 3D code. If you're not a 3D game developer, just someone on your team could be interested in, or you bring someone in that can do that 3D work for you for rendering and for rendering out the various matrices and rendering the camera. But let's go ahead and jump into that the helper class here. So this class, it essentially what it does, it hooks into the page layout so that you can be aware of if you need to draw the UI renderer. So if you're, as an example, the reason why you do this is that if your page goes out of scope, the page layout will fire, and it'll tell you that you should unhook from the game timer and stop rendering because the page is navigating away or it's going away. So it's kind of a little way for an object to kind of plug into the Silverlight framework to know that you're navigating away. I want to stop rendering. And then the rest of this code, it just kind of does all the background work in constructing up the model. It also does some really nice animation where you create a dependency property, and what you're doing is as you manipulate the teapot, you can use an animation to help you drive animations within your XNA 3D portion of your application. And then the last little bit I wanted to show was, here's the timer draw that we hooked for this control. So we got the game timer from the main page. We hook in a draw element, and we just say UI renderer.render. And then once we say render, that's when we take the snapshot of whatever controls are being drawn. Remember, the controls that we're rendering are the HUD for the teapot, the toggle panel, the progress bar. We say render whatever states it's in, and then you just draw it as a texture, UI renderer.texture, just as before. Great. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Yes?
Do you ever need to set sharing mode back to false?
You can. It depends on your application. So you could build your application where you only run XNA on a particular page, and you could set it to false. And you could do that during application processing. Yeah. Yeah, it will. It will. You should try to only use it when you need it. Although I'm going to show you a demo in a little bit where it's turned on for the entire application. And in this particular demo, we use storyboards to animate between page navigations. It's pretty neat, and I'll show you in a second in a bit. But so there's definitely reasons why you would do it either way. So as you notice in my demo, and it was a great lead-on question, I appreciate that the input for, that we were touching the Silverlight controls, the input was hidden with manipulating the teapot. So you can capture input via Silverlight, or you can capture by touch panel. We're recommended to do one or the other. So now let's go ahead and jump into the advanced use cases and some pretty cool demos. So one of the demos, and the great leader, and if your question over there on the left is navigating across pages using XNA rendering. So I'm going to show you a demo where we enable shared sharing, set sharing mode to true for the entire application. And then as each Silverlight page is navigated to, we're going to leave an XNA model in the background, and we're going to change the perspective on that model as we're transitioning to the new page. So it's a very, very compelling effect. You can also, another advanced use case is, in the teapot scenario, we had one UI renderer that was rendering that entire page. Like if you remember here, let me switch back to the code real quick. If we switch back to the code, page.xaml. So we were doing one UI element renderer that was rendering this entire page. So what that means is that there's some overdraw right here, right? Because that's where the teapot was being rendered. So we're essentially rendering the same area of the screen twice, and the GPU's got to do a little bit of work to kind of resolve that overdraw, figure out who's on top and what should be drawn, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the advanced use cases would be you could have a UI element renderer that just renders this portion of the screen, and then another UI element renderer that just renders this portion of the screen. So even though you're using two objects, from a graphics perspective, you're making it more efficient because everything that doesn't have a UI element render, like all this space in here, like if this was your core game functionality, and down here you had like a little bit of a status in a UI element render. Up here you had like game score and whatnot up top. You're actually making the game drawing more efficient by using multiple UI renderers. And then the last one is input. So let's go ahead and step forward, and let's jump into the demo. Let me open it up here first in Visual Studio. So the first one we're going to show is a model viewer. So here's the model viewer. It has a Silverlight page, just as before. And then in the code behind, we have a new class, a class called base page. And notice now, in the previous demos, there was all that XNA code that was kind of intermingled within your application. Now notice in this case, the main page doesn't have all of that XNA rendering kind of code kind of complicating your Silverlight application, right? As a Silverlight developer, if someone else was doing the coding for you, it would be great, right, to kind of have that all that XNA framework code in a separate base class. So I'm going to run the demo first, and then we'll go back and check out the base class. But pretty much you can see in the code behind, it's just button clicks and just navigating to different pages. So we'll go ahead and switch over. We'll look at the model. So if you're an XNA game developer, you may have seen this model, so just kind of reuse it. Love code reuse on demos. So I can, you see the model, and I can kind of configure the model from Silverlight and implement changes onto the XNA. So I can click free spin, and it'll let me manipulate the model and check it out. So we've seen that before. As with all good Windows Phone 7 applications, we kind of close a dialog or a page using the back button. And then we can also edit the model. So now notice what just happened there. I went from main page, by clicking that button, I went from main page. Let me switch back real quick. When I clicked the first button, I navigated to freespin.page. And notice how the model animated in the background when we did a navigation. And then I'm going to do it again. And then when I navigate to change the lights, it navigates to the edit page here. So we just go back. So when you see this model being manipulated, that's actually a page navigation that's going on. So if I click free spin, I navigate it to a page and I can manipulate it. Oh, sorry, thanks. There we go. So when I'm starting at the main application here, when I click free spin, I just kind of get into this mode and I click back. When I actually navigate to edit, I'm actually navigating to the lights page. And we'll look at that in a second. So here I can click on lights. And again, all these animations are happening in the background. Now what's neat is the animations are being driven by Silverlight's storyboards. So I can click and edit a light. I can go to diffuse, and I can make the tank look really green, or I can take out the blue and make it look make the tank look really red. And kind of edit it, and I can navigate back. You can have 1 to 3 lights. So I can go here and change specular and make it look kind of a different aspect, apply the green to different aspects, different reflections. So diffuse and specular are just different ways that light is being refracted that you can pick and choose in your application. And then we have other, where I can say this is like a debug mode. I want to see the application from a wireframe perspective. So it's just a 3D model that's being rendered. I can turn off the texture, and all we're seeing now is no texture, just the lights. And then you can see where the texture gets applied to the lights. And finally, I can also edit the animation. So I can turn on the wheels turning, turn on the turret. I can turn off the tank, hatch application. So obviously, someone spent quite a bit of time building out this 3D model. So, that's a given. Someone has to build out the XNA work for this and build out a model that you can import in XNA. What's is inside of it, you can use the XNA framework to manipulate it. All right, so let's go back to code. All right. So let's go inside the base page class here. So here's the base page class that we've defined, and it basically hides all of that XNA code that you were dealing with previously inside of this little base class. So we handle like starting and stopping the timers and all that kind of stuff. We handle UI render, as long as the texture is not null. If the texture width is not equal to actual width of 0, we don't want to draw if the page is navigating away. And then here we're doing the draw where we're rendering out the UI renderer. We're rendering out the UI code for the Silverlight part of the application. Question? Oh, okay, sorry. So let's go ahead. The thing that's great about the base class is that we could go ahead and create a new page like lights. So if I go over to the lights page, there's a little bit of XAML that handles, the UI for the page. But you can go to the code, and it's just, navigating to the different lights editor page and just passing in, which light am I modifying, just like you would in normal Silverlight. And then, if you just reset button click here, that just resets the renderer to reset to defaults. So, base page really helps keep things nice and clean for your application. Let me go back here. All right, so last demo I wanted to show you real quick is, let me switch back. Go to the model viewer. Is the text box. So again, handling input in XNA is very difficult, but there is a page that you can take input from a game perspective and launch it. It's like a task or chooser, and it'll show input, and then you can get the input from the user. But it navigates you away from your application, whereas this is much nicer. The input is right over the image. But mainly the idea here is just to show there's a little copy paste there. So it's working within the app. It's just a Silverlight app. So I could, come in here and say, hi there, and capture the input and just input in the text box, and it just works, even though we have a 3D model that's animating in the background. This is fantastic for XNA developers because it means that what they end up doing usually is they end up writing a custom SIP. And then if they have to support multiple languages, it just becomes unmaintainable and buggy. This really simplifies taking input for XNA games. So let's jump for the current slide. And 2 more demos to go through here, 2 more use cases. So, you're seeing so far we've been XNA drawing between the 2 techniques, and between the Silverlight and XNA, we've kind of done XNA game drawing. But it's, other scenarios start to come to mind, like, can I draw a video from a media element within XNA? That would be very useful if you need to show. How they do in the various games, like Halo, for instance. There's like a little movie for a little while there, and you can embed movies in XNA, but it runs full screen. It'd be nice to have that movie almost run like, with a nice background and kind of be embedded in alpha, blended into the application and make it look more professional. And then the other scenario, which is very exciting, is with Windows Phone 7 Mango, with the Mango edition of that's coming out here soon in tools this month. You can capture the video stream from the camera and have that sort of preview that on the screen for augmented reality scenarios. So today in Windows Phone 7, you can use the camera task to take a picture, but you can't get video. So let's go ahead and jump into those demos. All right, so let me switch over. Excellent. So in this sample, you see a video that's currently running within the phone. Nothing too exciting yet. But notice if I touch the screen, I'm actually applying an effect. In essence, like a shader, essentially a programmable shader that's encapsulated in the effect classes. So it kind of gives you the ability to really twist and turn, so to speak, different UI elements within Silverlight without without a tremendous amount of effort. I mean, this would take some work in Silverlight to do directly. It's a pretty cool demo. And then the next one we're going to do is we're going to run video again here. And this is, again, applying an effect to a video, and almost like a wave video effect to your Silverlight media element from XNA. So it kind of shows how you can take XNA capabilities and bring them into Silverlight in an even more deeper integration. And then the last demo that we're going to run is one that I think will be taken advantage of by developers in a big way. It's the ability to build augmented reality applications. So I'm going to pick up the phone here. We have another camera that's going to help us out. So right now, I'm using the camera capture task. And we'll see the camera switch over. Awesome. That looks great. So here we have new capabilities of Mango. There's a guy waving over there. Got you on camera. I'm not recording. We're just previewing here, so no worries. And notice in front of it, I'm paying homage to Mix. This is where we released the Mango platform. As I move the camera, the model, and that's a 3D model. That is not a sprite. As I move the model around, but as I move the camera around, the model kind of stays in its position in the world. Now imagine a scenario of I'm building an application that has points of interest, or I'm at a theme park, and the theme park has rides, and I have my app open. I know where I'm at via location sensor. I know which direction I'm pointing from the compass sensor. I can orient the phone in space, and then I can know which direction the phone is pointing, and I can know how close I am to an object. So imagine this being a theme park ride. I can, click on the 3D model, right? Because we've demonstrated we can take input from Silverlight, and I could display like a Silverlight overlay on the screen and learn more about that ride. Maybe find out what the wait time is on the ride, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty awesome capability that's coming to the Mango platform. Thank you. So takeaways. We now can say that from a phone platform support with Mango, that Silverlight and XNA are now friends. They're complete friends. Before they were kind of dating. Now they've committed. They can now render and also take advantage of each other's frameworks from within applications. Yes.
So one of the original, great use cases for XNA was the ability to kind of write mostly cross-platform code to run on Xbox, Windows, and now Windows Phone. How is that guidance changing now with this? Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the question is, in XNA Game Studio, there's two profiles in XNA Game Studio 4. There's a profile called Reach and a profile called High Def. So High Def targets like Xbox and PC. Reach lets you target phone, desktop, and Xbox with essentially the same code base. The differences would be on Xbox, you're handling input with a controller, PC, mouse and keyboard. On phone, it's touch and accelerometer. So that's the Reach profile today. So the question is, with that Reach profile, how does this affect it? So it's a great question. Right now, Silverlight plus XNA friendship is only integrated on the Windows Phone on the Windows Phone platform, and there's no announcements to be made or anything like that. But it's a good question for sure. So the answer is that if you need to target multiple platforms, you have to stick with the XNA game project and just keep coding with the with the Reach profile. So hopefully with all the Silverlight developers in the room, I hope that this gets you excited with the possibilities of how you can incorporate XNA framework. You might want to play around and learn a little bit of XNA. There's tons of examples and help up at App Hub that can get you going with XNA development. Or you can bring in those skills and kind of in those scenarios where it really makes sense, augmented reality, or you just want to use models, or you want to have interesting transitions and animations, kind of bring that into your applications. And if you do know Silverlight, we highly encourage you to go ahead and learn XNA. So this is the questions page. We've had a few questions along the way. Does anyone have any other additional questions? Or yes?
Silverlight and XNA, it kind of looked like Silverlight is always rendered above. Is that true?
True if only. So the question was, when you draw with XNA framework, you use the sprite batch, and you call sprite batch.begin, sprite batch.end, and then in between there, you can say sprite batch.draw or sprite batch.drawString. So a draw and draw string, draw, you draw texture, you draw images, draw string, you can draw strings to the screen as bitmaps. So the question, generally, by default, the order in which you call sprite batch.draw is the order in which objects are rendered. So if you want to put an object behind another object, you can render them in that order. You can also specify the order as well and make that dynamic. But basically, the last one in is on top. So in the demos, the Silverlight content has been rendered as the last item in on purpose so that you could capture the input on the Silverlight controls and see them, quite frankly. I think the thinking is that if you're drawing a HUD or a scoreboard, it's going to be kind of one of the last things that you render. But you could draw the UI element, the UI renderer.texture first, and then overlay XNA on top of it, and you just wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't get input, or you wouldn't see it, essentially. It would be culled out. Great. All right, so if not, let's go ahead and do the question. So the question is, what is the name of the extension method of it? Okay. What's that? Yes, that is it. Come on up. You can get your phone. Good job. All right, so any other questions? No, okay. Like your lights there. They're pretty cool. All right, any other questions or anything? Feel free to come on up. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming to this.